A Canadian inventor who successfully adapted a car to run on ammonia more than 40 years ago believes the government suppressed its development because of its interest in petroleum, also thwarting moves towards a hydrogen economy. My guest today says a clean, low-carbon energy source with reduced emissions that could help decarbonise industry is possible. I'm journalist Angela Walker, and in this podcast I talk to inspirational people and discuss underreported issues. My guest today is Greg Vezina, Chairman and CEO of Hydrofuel Canada. Greg, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on the show.
Now, I want to ask you how we can move towards a hydrogen economy later in the programme, but first I want to hear about this car, because take us back to the 1980s. You converted your Chevy to run on ammonia. How did you do it, and why did you do it?
Long story short, I was sitting in a gas station or a garage waiting for my car. I picked up a copy of Popular Mechanics or something, and it talked about an idea to use solar energy in Nevada to make a hydrogen fuel to run cars. And there were some serious people involved: Jack Nicholson, Marlon Brando, Joanne Carson, Dr. Herbert Maturay, who reversed the LED. And I thought, I want in on this. So I got together with my family and some friends, and we invested in the technology. It turned out the company went out of business because they got in a squabble with the US government, which people are learning you shouldn't try to do. And so we decided either to write it off and walk away, or to do it ourselves. So we hired the people we could out of Los Angeles. We went to our family farm, my wife's family farm in Saskatchewan, and we bought a Chevy Impala and a Chevy truck diesel, and we converted both of them to run on ammonia fuel. The gasoline version worked better. It was easier, less complicated. Diesel compression, ignition of ammonia, which is a very narrow flame area to ignite, is much more challenging. So we said, all right, we're going with a car. And we started in Edmonton, and we drove it from Edmonton, Alberta to Ottawa. We arrived in Ottawa the week of our Constitution settlement. And the Governor General then, Ed Schreier, who was a very big supporter of alternative energy and what we were doing, called a press conference on Constitution Day, the morning that we settled our Constitution after 100 and whatever years. And half of Parliament showed up, a number of cabinet ministers, and the media was there, and they said, assuming it's competitive with oil, they'll encourage you in support, and their department is working very closely with us. And here we are 44 years later, and we're still waiting for their department to be working very closely with us. But the bottom line is we drove the car across Canada, then to Montreal, and then to Toronto. And I've spent the last 40 years trying to show the world that ammonia, is a fuel, an energy currency, a way to store and use hydrogen. And indeed, it's a way to utilize hydrocarbons in non-polluting applications. So really, that's what it's all about. It started out as a kid waiting for his car to be fixed, who found out about a technology and chased the dream.
So you made it work. You proved that it could work. You drove it across Canada. You showed it to the politicians. They said they were going to get behind developing it further. What went wrong?
Politicians, by their very nature, are what I would call, at best, conflicted. You got to dance with the one what run ya. So in order to understand policy, public policy, you have to understand who gets these people elected. And the reality is that it's not the voters. It's whatever special interest group it is. If it's a conservative, it's money. If it's the Socialist or New Democratic Party in Canada, it's the union. If it's the Liberal Party, it's both. So politicians promise one thing, and then when they get elected, they have to pay off the favors, and they have to do the things for the constituents that are required to stay elected. And a great example in environmental error is the United States policy on ethanol. Al Gore broke the tie vote as vice president, and America had an ethanol policy and subsidy. But if you want to stop pollution, you just stop. You don't increase it with technologies that are worse. Ethanol only contains 75% of the energy that was in the diesel fuel and fertilizer used to make it. You want to reduce pollution by 25%? Outlaw it. Don't mandate it. U.S. is increasing the mandated use in Canada from 10 to 15%. The EU is going down from 7.9 to 4 to 0. They're outlawing using old growth wood chips from BC in power plants in the UK and calling it green. So the short answer is the politics have been conflicted because they can't be honest. They won't allow level playing field. They won't allow winners to be winners and losers to losers. They want the largest sector of the economy to be the industry of applying for government grants for industry. And that's really what happened. Eventually, and when Greta Thunberg tells us it will be totally green in 2035, eventually reality hits. And you understand, A, how big the problem is, and B, how expensive it's going to be to clean it up. And classic example is the Republicans in the United States wanting you to go to jail for life for smoking one marijuana joint. But where were the first 13 states in the United States to legalize marijuana? Republican states. Why? Because they eventually followed the money. So what's happened is that we're now in global politics, especially with what's going on in the United States, where countries are going to have to look at baseline economics. They're going to have to look at the cost of their economy of importing technology and energy versus producing. And they'll go back to the Brazil experiment for ethanol, which, Brazil was bankrupt, 19th largest economy in the world. The IMF was taking their schools, hospitals, and airports for interest on loans. And they said, forget it, bulldoze the rainforest, we're going to make alcohol fuels. And it took about 10 years to figure out how not to bulldoze it every year. But the bottom line is, here we are 30 years later. They're the 9th largest economy in the world. And there's nothing built on that runs on alcohol in the world that isn't built in Brazil. And the IMF said at the end they could spend 10 times as much producing internally as for imports, because imports meant the money left the economy immediately and came back as investment in infrastructure at pennies on the dollar. But if they did it internally, it went through the economy 13 times, creating 390 times the percent tax base. So if you do it yourself, even if it costs you more, you're better off. So now we've reached that wonderful nirvana where we're going to move very quickly, I think in probably less than a decade, from 13 countries providing 90% of the world's energy to 90% of the world making their own. And that means 90% of the world is a first world country. Because if you have energy, technology, resources, etc., you have an agriculture, you're a first world country. And they'll have at least one, and that gives you the other three.
I want to get back to this point really about, the political will to invest in developing ammonia as a fuel wasn't there. Do you think it was actually suppressed, this invention of yours?
Well, there are people that claim that, and they claim that about a water car, and they claim a 200 mile per gallon carburetor was suppressed. But, I just think it's just the way things were. Their focus was on Canada buying an oil company. We owned an oil company, for Christ's sakes. A politician who heard that someone had a better technology, who had just spent billions of dollars on taxpayers' money on an oil company, probably didn't want to hear that there was something else. The other thing is that you got to remember, in politics, things is cyclical. So hydrogen was really big in 1980 and 81. By 83 or 84, it was dead. In 2000, hydrogen was really big for 3 or 4 years, was dead. Here we are in the same basic cycle that started again in 2020. The problem is that most new technologies are science experiments. They're not economically viable at grid scale. And that's really one of the things that we've learned and we've dealt with the technologies we have today. We've defeated grid scale being better and more economic because of transportation and storage. We're now at the point where we can clean hydrocarbons or make ammonia at end use right where they use it the day before they use it. Well, that eliminates 2/3 of your costs. So now all of a sudden, cleaner technologies are viable based on simple mathematics, not government subsidies, not incentives, not politicians that come and go. So that's the really important thing that's happened. I don't think I was suppressed as much as the whole sector was ignored. But understand, the US military did a huge project in the 1960s on ammonia as a fuel. It was called the Energy Depot. And although the idea ended up being not executed properly, the science was proven. They were losing 4 out of 5 fuel convoys going to the front line, not accounting the loss of life. So they wanted to find a way to make fuel at the front line. So some genius said, let's drop a portable tokamak nuclear reactor at the front line and make a fuel. What can we make? They figured out they could make ammonia. They hired GM, Continental Aviation Engineering. They made ammonia fuel cells, ammonia engines. They proved it worked. And then it got to the Senate committee, and some congressman asked the military guy, what happens when they blow up the portable nuclear reactor? And he said, we won't fight for that land for 10,000 years. And then out went the baby with the bathwater. So just because that particular way to do it was proven to be, a little out there, they threw it all away. But America came back to this in 1980, 81 as well. And a great deal of research said, we should do this. Of course, it was ignored. It came back again in 2000, as I said, not only hydrogen, but ammonia. And an Ammonia Energy Association was started, and off it went. Today, there is ammonia-powered ships being sold. There are conversion systems to convert bunker fuel oil ships to run on ammonia or alternative fuels or a combination. There are coal-powered plants where they're using ammonia to reduce emissions. So what's happened is what we said should happen has happened, but it's only happened at the industrial scale. It hasn't happened at the consumer level. And to be honest, the reason we converted a car to run on ammonia instead of a generator was because the media wants you to do something sexy, like run your car. The last place you're going to use ammonia is in a passenger car in a major urban center. There are so many other places to use it where it's safer, cheaper, and you don't risk a Hindenburg experiment.
How viable is it to really shift over what we're doing worldwide, really? But I'm quite interested, obviously, because I'm in the UK. How, what is the potential of ammonia here? I mean, it's cleaner, it's greener. Could we potentially move over to it? Is it feasible for us to have it here?
Well, people have to understand a fundamental fact, how big the energy sector is, okay? It's 10, 11 trillion dollars a year out of $110 trillion global GDP. It is very, 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 very big. So there are numerous specific applications today where this works better than anything else we have. Keep in mind, though, we have fossil fuels. They exist. When you're going to make a form of energy from something, you got to make it from start to finish. So you need to generate the electricity, and then you need to convert it, the water into hydrogen and oxygen. And then, okay, so there are places where this will work today, and there's places where it won't. And then you have emerging technologies or emerging energy supplies. What we've now found out about is something called white hydrogen, which is basically very low carbon content natural gas, okay? And we found out there are trillions and trillions of metric tons of this stuff around the world. Now, you got to go down 10,000 meters to get it. So there will be places where very low cost hydrogen is available either because of cheap electricity or stranded electricity. And the third thing is we have, hundreds, if not thousands of years of hydrocarbon. What happens if we develop the technology to utilize, to refine them without using heat and electricity made from hydrocarbons, and then find a way to utilize them at end use without emitting the carbon? Now, all of a sudden, we've got this huge supply of hydrocarbons that we've been told by people has to stay in the ground, that don't have to stay in the ground. There'll be less pollution if you eliminate upstream and downstream carbon emissions from the midstream, even if it's 7% instead of the 3% industry says, than there would be building a windmill, or building a solar farm, because you got to mine the materials and da. So we really have three major sources of feedstocks to move to a hydrogen economy. Except you can't get to a hydrogen economy with hydrogen, because hydrogen doesn't like to be hydrogen. It likes to be hydrogen and something, oxygen and water, nitrogen and ammonia, carbon and hydrocarbons. So although ammonia contains half of the energy density of diesel, it is 1.5 times more hydrogen than hydrogen itself liquefied, using 40% of the energy to do it. So ammonia is the easy way to use hydrogen. But then the question becomes, are we going to build this massive infrastructure like we have for the oil and gas industry? Remember, $11 trillion a year for the last how many years? We're talking about $500 billion to replace that infrastructure. And if you're using renewables, that's every 15 years, except they need 3 to 1 for storage and regeneration to replace baseload. So we're coming up with $500 billion every 5 years. That's $100 trillion a year. That's the entire GDP to go green.
Could we not integrate like the hydrogen economy with the existing economy and maybe just be phasing that out so that we are going greener, we are going towards hydrogen, but we're not having a massive switch over? We're kind of allowing things to run their course a bit more.
That's in fact the answer. The answer is we're not going to throw away this hydrocarbon infrastructure and industry we have. It's there. And it's going to continue. And the reason it's going to continue is global demand is not leveled up. It's just going up and up and up and up. And we need to supply this energy. But at the same time, you're absolutely correct. There are a number of places where we could start replacing the pollutingness, the worst of hydrocarbons, with renewable hydrogen stored in ammonia and manufactured as close as possible to end use. The plan of taking renewable electricity in Newfoundland, Canada, and making ammonia and shipping it to Germany to convert it back to electricity. If you do your grade 3 math and science, it's not really, really good. And here are the numbers. Let's assume that electrolysis is 50%, 60% efficiency. And let's assume that you can convert that hydrogen into ammonia at not the 65% efficiency of Haber, but let's say another 60%. Okay, now you got to ship that ammonia from Newfoundland to Germany. Well, the World Bank says it costs $9 a kilogram to ship hydrogen as hydrogen and $3 a kilogram to ship hydrogen and ammonia. But you can make ammonia for under $3 a kilogram with electricity up to 8 cents. So you'll make it in Germany. You won't ship it. So there won't be this large scale. Yeah. Where it will be used very quickly. You've got large, huge offshore wind capacity in the UK. There's a Leeds project now that has 65 wind generators on the ocean that make ammonia on site that will fuel barges. Wow. So you don't have to have any domestic fuel production and storage and transportation and warehousing in the port. Everything's offshore. And if something goes wrong, you're not going to pollute the ocean with an ammonia spill. Well, that's one great example. There are other great examples in industry. JCB has just put out a hydrogen engine, a wonderful product for big, heavy equipment. In the cement industry, in the garbage industry, you have huge demand for fuel. You have centralized fuel and you have dedicated routes, private roads. Those are places where we could probably replace as much as 40% of the hydrocarbons we use with ammonia. So there are really, really places with low-hanging fruit.
And I want to ask you, because we've been talking about like Europe and Canada, but the biggest polluters, as we know, are China. Russia is a huge polluter. Are these countries going to get on board with a hydrogen kind of economy?
I would say no, or not likely in the short to medium term for Russia. I will say that China is already so far ahead of the rest of the world, it's ridiculous. I mean, they are running coal plant. They're building, a coal plant a day, but they're starting to run them on between 20 and 50% ammonia. They have they have ammonia buses. They have ammonia fuel cells. They have ammonia cars. They have ammonia generators. China's an importer of energy. So again, they've done the math. It costs it 10 times as much to import energy as it costs them over a generation to make it themselves. They're making it themselves. China has a huge renewable energy industry. They probably produce half or more of all of the solar and wind technology used in the planet Earth. China is going to be a very, very big competitor to economies that don't evolve.
That's really interesting. I had no idea actually that China were on board, because we're often, in the UK, we import so much stuff that's produced in factories in China. And one of the real concerns people have is about the carbon footprint for, the cheap products that we're having. And people don't seem to want to let go of having those cheap products. So to know that they are moving over to hydrogen is definitely it's definitely a good thing. So what are the biggest challenges, do you think, Greg, are like moving over? Do you think it's like a mindset thing of getting people to kind of accept that ammonia is a good way to produce energy?
I don't want to be insulting, but the last place you need to go is to the consumer, okay? The disinformation potential, it's just, you go to the industries that can do it today, that are already doing it, that see the benefits, okay? I'll give you another good example. Why would you take electricity, convert it to hydrogen, put it in a blast furnace in a steel mill to reduce your emissions, when you can just use the electricity in an arc furnace, okay? You have to match the utilization technology with the demand. And so, again, I say, hydrogen passenger vehicles have been a disaster, okay? Every hydrogen bus test that's going on now is having challenges. They're finding out that the fuel storage is great, but all those metal piping and fueling systems in the hydrogen bus leak because hydrogen will go right through metal. Every high-speed hydrogen train that's ever been built has run once, set a record, and been shut down. Okay, why? Grade 3 math. It costs 10 times as much to use it versus clean diesel, supposedly. Well, the fact of the matter is that the hydrocarbon combustion technology is so clean. It's so good. I mean, it is very good. So the best applications, I believe, are hybrids. And there's one very important reason. An electric battery system will lose as much as half of its energy providing heating and cooling for the battery and the vehicle. A hybrid has a small internal combustion engine, very inefficient, wastes 70% of the energy in heat. So having a small internal combustion engine and a smaller battery allows you to run 50, 100 kilometers on the battery. But if you need heat or cooling, extreme heat or cooling, it comes from waste heat from the internal combustion engine. So there's a place where it will work. But wait, hydrogen is $30 a kilo retail. That's equivalent to gasoline at $30 a gallon. So while it's a nice thought and a nice experiment, the bottom line is where hydrogen's going to be used is where it can be used. And it ain't going to be used for personal passenger vehicles, in my opinion, until you can fill your vehicle up with water. Once you can fill your vehicle up with water and turn it into hydrogen, that's when it'll be used. But to be honest, Angela, before that, we will put diesel in a truck. We will use light to crack the diesel into pure carbon, run that engine on hydrogen, and then when you fill up your diesel truck, they will pay you for the carbon you made cheaper than they can make it in a factory and ship it. And that's what photochemistry is, and that's the second technology we've developed. We developed a way to make ammonia very cheap, green, using electricity. or to make ammonia cheap using cheap hydrogen, using a third of the energy that you use with today's technology. But on the other side, at the University of Toronto, we're working on photochemistry. And simply what that means is the world today is run on heat and electricity, thermal chemistry and electrochemistry, and 80% of it comes from hydrocarbons. We can either find a way to make those without pollution or find a way to not even use them, which you can do with light and LEDs that run 24/7. All of a sudden, we can refine oil and everything else without carbon pollution. Now, you can do exactly the same thing at end use. You can still use the existing pipelines and infrastructure that we've got $500 quadrillion invested in for the next 50 years as we evolve. So again, people got to understand we're spending millions of dollars doing basic research at a university, not commercial, not technology readiness level 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, and 3. Why are we doing it? To be honest, Angela, because nobody's doing it. Companies don't invest in basic fundamental science today. You know where the greatest inventions in the world have all come from? Basic science. So we got to win with ammonia, but we got a bigger win with using light to replace all heat and electricity generated from hydrocarbons. Now, it'll only take 50 years for that technology to be adopted by industry and consumers, because the sector's so big. But to finish back to your point, yes. There are many places where we can use emerging technologies or even old technologies with existing technologies in combination to reduce emissions, to reduce cost, and to reduce imports.
And that's what we want, isn't it? We want to reduce emissions. We want a cleaner, greener fuel. We know that the planet's in crisis with all these emissions that we're creating. And you're saying that all the research is being done at a university level. Is there any way that we're going to see this kind of research sped up so that we can see this cleaner fuel like rolled out sooner? Because the longer that we wait, the longer that we leave it, the more damage is being done and the harder it's going to be to turn it around.
I'm actually very, very positive for the first time in 40 years. There is a race. There is a Manhattan Project going on in both ammonia production and utilization, but more importantly, in photochemistry. There are 50 countries in the world that use photochemistry and light to clean water in ways that could never have been done in the past at costs a fraction of anything we do today. So there are emerging technologies that will allow us to get there. And the secret, as I've said in the beginning, is will the government please get out of the way, put a real price on all pollution, not just from hydrocarbons from petroleum. What about hydrocarbons elsewhere? Don't call renewable natural gas green. All you're doing is stripping the gas off a garbage dump and leaving all the garbage and claiming you're making improvement. That is total BS. So I think that we have reached the point, as I said, where money counts, where the economics count, where balance of trade counts, where imports and exports count, and where governments actually are starting to encourage industry to dive deep into these emerging technologies. Hydrofuel is about to announce an agreement in the EU with a major European university to co-develop the work we're doing with University of Toronto. I can't release details now, but we're featured at the Canadian Hydrogen Conference in Edmonton, Alberta, April 23rd to 24th, and there will be some announcements there.
Oh, that's great news. I want to just come back to what you were saying. So really, you would like to see governments around the world putting in place penalties for polluters in order to encourage more investment in green energy. Is that your point you're making?
I'm asking for a life cycle accounting. I'm not paying for somebody else's pollution. You pay for your own. For example, to be hysteric, I have a car that runs on nuclear waste. I want a permit. Well, the government say, fine, it's $1 million a mile, sir. How many miles would you like to drive your nuclear waste car? Okay. Nobody should pay for someone else's price. What we need is a real price on all pollution, and then let the marketplace decide. Because remember, consumers will go to the lowest cost option. If the lowest cost option is because the government subsidizes an industry to pollute instead of making the industry pay for it, where they're going to go. Let capitalism do what capitalism actually can do. Find the lower cost options. Get out of the way. And, you know, in the EU, you've got a price on carbon of even $20 a ton. Well, make it apply to everybody, not just hydrocarbons. And you don't need and to be honest, these emerging technologies don't need a price on carbon. The economics are becoming so astounding that they won't even need it. And when you add the health costs, the actual healthcare costs, and the loss of productivity to the price of pollution in economies, everyone will move to the right solution if they have a clue of where it is. Right now, we don't have that knowledge, but we're getting there.
Greg, how can people find out more about Hydrofuel Canada and the work that you're up to?
Well, thank you for the question. The best place is on our website, which is nh3fuel.com or hydrofuel.com, which will flip you over. And then just look at the news feed. There's details of our MAPS tech. There's details of our collaboration with the University of Toronto. There's the research we did at the University of Ontario, Colorado State, Georgia Tech. What's there is the proof is in the pudding. And if you want to know the truth, you got to go and find the scientific research. You got to look at the science. And science is more about proving what doesn't work as opposed to what does. And that's what we really, really think needs to be done. We need to prove what works.
Greg, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Well, I asked the Canadian government for their response and they sent me this statement. It says, Canada's hydrogen strategy sets out a framework for Canada to be a global hydrogen leader, cementing this low-carbon, zero-emission fuel technology as a key part of our path to our climate targets. Our country has the potential to be a long-term, stable and reliable global supplier of clean energy such as hydrogen. Advancing the development of hydrogen production and its derivatives, including ammonia, the Canadian government statement says, will support Canada's clean energy transition, boost our economy, create good jobs and foster innovation. NR can invest in research programs and activities to enable and support the development of clean energy infrastructure. And you can find out more about what the Canadian government has to say on their website. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. Also put a link in the show notes to Greg Vezina's Hydrofuel website as well. Thank you so much for joining me. You've been listening to Angela Walker in Conversation. Please take a moment to subscribe, comment and like this podcast. That means the algorithm will show it to more people. And I hope you've enjoyed the programme. You can find more of my work on my website, angelawalkerreports.com. Until next time, take care.